Drama. Wow, what a weekend of drama did we have. And I'm a little late, but nevertheless, we got to talk about all of that. But we also got to talk about Ottawa Rapid sweeping the floor with Halifax Tides. Toronto getting the job done against Calgary Wild. But most of all, we really got to talk about Vancouver Rise making a statement win against Montreal Roses. And really just standing up and saying, okay, just hold on. We got the second spot, and we are coming for you, Toronto. We got you in our sides. So yeah, lots to talk about. And yeah, let's get into it. I mean, we have to start with the drama, don't we? We had some bombshell news this past weekend. I have to apologize that I'm a little bit late to this. I'm sorry about that. Some personal things going on. But nevertheless, let's cover it. I mean, Latifa Abdou going over to Vancouver Rice from Montreal Roses. The first ever major internal transfer for NSL, and man, what a big one this is. I remember talking about last week when Latifa Abdou requested for her contract to be terminated with the Roses, and we went through the whole press release that the Montreal Roses put out, and it was pretty clear what they had to say. I mean, it was not something that they wanted. They were completely taken aback when Abdou mentioned that it was what she wanted. It was a misunderstanding that happened in their meeting that they had for a technical review, and nobody knows what that misunderstanding was. And the result of it was Montreal were just going to be supportive to get her into the best place that she wanted to be in. And that was that, right? I mean, they were looking at different options. They did say whether that's the NSL or NWSL and so on. And I remember saying that it was not going to be NSL because, I mean, just the league dynamics, you know, when a player goes from one team to another, you're always curious about what it psychologically does to another team. Like, what are they thinking about the way it played out with the Roses? But seems like Vancouver doesn't care. Vancouver's like, let's go. Let's bring her on. She is the leading scorer for the Roses, and now she is the leading scorer for Vancouver Rise, even though she hasn't scored a single goal for them yet. But you get the point. And so the fact remains that Latifa Abdou, as of Saturday, this past Saturday, is a Vancouver Rise player. And it was even more interesting that she became, or the announcement came just around the time that the game was set to kick off between Vancouver Rise and Montreal Roses. And that's what brings us to the clause that she has in her contract, actually, which is she's not allowed to play against Montreal Roses in the regular season, which actually there isn't a lot more left. So I think there's one more game after this past weekend's game, which is on October 11th. So it only applies to that one game. But here's what I think happened during that negotiation. So one thing to note is this was not a contract termination. Latifa Abdou was not a free agent. So there was still room for negotiation for the Roses, because Roses were obliging to Latifa Abdou's request for a transfer, and they were looking for options. And most likely it seems like Vancouver Rise reached out. And so Roses were in the position to negotiate. Seems like Montreal Roses put in a clause saying, okay, we're open to sending her over only if you don't play Abdou against us during the regular season. And most likely what must have happened is Vancouver must have agreed to it for a lower transfer fee. This is just based on how a lot of other such transfers happen in the men's leagues around the world. So, and that would make sense for both teams. Rise gets the player and also a lower transfer fee, and Montreal gets her off board because obviously you don't want a player that doesn't want to be there, and also it doesn't hurt them in at least the regular season. It's hard to make a clause that applies beyond that. I mean, that would just not be great sportsman spirit in general. And also I don't think, I mean, the clause doesn't say if it's just this season or not, but my guess is it's only this season. It's obviously doesn't make sense that this clause goes on for another season. And that's what usually happens. Like usually it's for one season. And so the clause is for this season, for regular season. Vancouver Rise doesn't get to play Latifa Abdou against Montreal Roses. Now, let's answer a few questions. First, what does this mean for Latifa Abdou? I think she has the ability to fit right into the forward line, especially given what Vancouver has. DiFilippo, Mariah Lee, I mean, Abdu just slots in. She, as I mentioned, is the highest leading scorer for Vancouver as well. No one in their team has scored as many. So in terms of ability, that's not a question at all. She is going to start right away as soon as they can get her to start. What does matter, or what is going to be interesting to see, is the temperament that she has. In terms of temperament, can she deal with Anja Heine-Muller? We all know Anja Heine-Muller and the way she leads, and she's she has a clear plan, and she wants all the players to kind of fall in line with that. The way Abdu and the way she left Montreal Roses, it paints a picture of her having her own voice, and I wonder how that can play into Anja Heine-Muller's system and if it's going to sync well. So that, I don't know. The temperament is something I want to see how it plays out. I have my doubts. What does it mean for Vancouver? It really just means that Vancouver becomes a much, much bigger threat. We are going to cover this in the game that they played against the Roses this weekend. It was another statement win, and it showed us what Vancouver can do, but now they become even more of a threat. Not just because that their forward line gets better. Obviously, it gets better. I mean, Holly Ward, Latifa Abdu, and most likely DeFilippo is going to be their front three. And that is a pretty good front three. But I think what it does more is it opens up more options in the midfield. What this means is Samantha Chang can now play in the midfield a little bit more. She can drop back, and that'll help Stanton, Quinn, and Pechersky with more space and also more backup time. Like they don't have to play every minute of every game. They'll get more time to relax and recover if they're going through injuries. Quinn, I know, is for sure going through injuries. Stanton has picked up some injuries in the recent past. So they really need some rotational ability in the midfield, and this gives them that. Samantha Chang can drop back in. And in the forward line, obviously, Abdu brings that threat of being able to connect with Quinn, being able to connect with Stanton much more easily. Those long balls that Quinn is able to play now has someone who can get at the end of. So this makes Vancouver easily the second team to beat, I would say, after AFC Toronto. In fact, they're going to easily challenge AFC Toronto. The Toronto-Vancouver game that's going to come up next, that's going to be such a amazing game to watch, because the winner of that is going to decide who really is going to win the league, really. I mean, we're going to cover this in the game with Montreal Roses. I have my doubts with Roses now. I have my doubts with Ottawa Rapid as well. But yeah, these two teams really are going in for that final battle. As I was looking up, AFC Toronto versus Vancouver Rise is coming up in 2 weeks. I mean, not this weekend, but the weekend after. So that's going to be a huge game that'll tell us so much about this transfer and how it shapes out. So yeah, the challenge is how do they incorporate Abdu into that fold, and that'll dictate a lot of how it goes. So yeah, we'll talk about the game itself. Vancouver and Montreal played this weekend, so we'll talk about the game itself. But in terms of the news, this is amazing for the league. This is what a lot of other leagues thrive on, because it starts a conversation, it gets people talking. It got a lot of people talking, not just on our communities that we are part of, on Reddit and everywhere else, but it also gets other new people talking and getting involved into the league. So as I talked about last week as well, about what this means for the league, it means really good things. These things need to happen as long as there's no exploitation of player interest or club interest technically, and everyone is acting in fair spirit. It's all fair game. So great to see this, and good luck to Latifa, good luck to Vancouver, and yeah, really good luck to Montreal. We'll talk about it in a little bit. Anyway, second piece of news, a little bit of a sad news, I would say. Erin McLeod of Halifax Tides retires from all forms of competitive soccer. She had been dealing with a bone bruise recently, and also had been dealing with a plantar fasciitis tear. So her season was declared to be done recently, and it's just sad to see that led to also the end of her career as well. She will still be involved in other forms of the game, obviously, but in terms of her playing time, this basically marks the end of it. I mean, she is a legend for the Canadian women's soccer ecosystem. She will be remembered and cherished in so many different ways. I mean, I remember her under-19 World Cup runner-up run that she had. I mean, everyone remembers the Mohawk from that. But then, yeah, 20 years almost of playing for Team Canada, 3 World Cups, 2 Olympics, and she got a bronze in the 2012 one. An absolute legend of the game. I think she was one of the first, or maybe one of the most impactful goalkeepers that Canada had. Canada's had a few good ones now, but yeah, she definitely ranks pretty high up in that list. But yeah, it's sad to see her go. She obviously struggled through the season. It's just tough when you get so many injuries this late into your career. But yeah, thank you for everything, Erin, and we wish you the best in your future endeavors in soccer or otherwise, and we'd love to see you around in other forms of the game, behind the scenes and the ecosystem. So, all right, that's all the news we have. Let's get into some actual drama on the field. All right, enough drama off the pitch. Let's talk about some drama on the pitch, which was Ottawa Rapid, who were hosting Halifax Tides for the first game of the week. Halifax were coming off of a rest weekend, so they really needed to show some character. I mean, they've had 4 goals in 9 games before this, so they needed to show something. Meanwhile, Ottawa were actually coming off of pretty subpar weekend for their recent form, because they didn't just lose the game 2-3 to Vancouver, but also lost their 3rd spot, and they're really in the mix for this, so they needed something to get back into their momentum and, keep going. So there was a lot to play for Ottawa. So for Tides, the only main change I really want to mention is Gunny Jonstotir coming back in after almost 2 months out with injury. So it was going to be interesting to see what she does. Lemire actually was the one who sat out, Karima Lemire. I thought was very interesting because Karima Lemire had been doing a pretty good job. Meanwhile, for Ottawa, Fridland and Golan started next to Pridham, which I also thought was interesting because it seems like Ottawa is really playing around with their front line and rotating. Anyways, first half, Ottawa start with the same 3 at the back strategy from the last 2 games, which has been working pretty well for them, with fullbacks playing high up and Desi Scott dropping down into that defense. Meanwhile, Halifax started with a 4-4-2, even though that seemed defensive, at least in the first 10 minutes. Halifax were pressing really well, I have to say. Maybe it's because also Ottawa weren't switched on, but anyways, this pressing gave Halifax quite a bit of the ball, but they really didn't do anything with that in the final third. So it just meant that the ball was in Ottawa's half, but it didn't lead to anything for Halifax. But then the first time Ottawa got the ball and started driving with it, they make it count, because they get the ball in midfield, they get a lot of space, and they realize that Jonstotir is super rusty right now, and she's not able to track Fridland's run in the midfield. And that means that the defense is pulled out of position because Johanna Fridland's making that run and Jonstotir is not tracking her. So the defense comes out. This leads to a lot of space for Golan on the wing, and she gets the ball and she's got a lot of time to make a cross, which she does. And that's where a little bit of luck plays in, because the cross gets deflected, and guess who it falls to? DB Pridham. And once it falls to DB Pridham, you might as well just pack your bags, because she does finish once again reliably, and Ottawa are 1-0 up. I mean, Ottawa show Halifax what to do in the final third with their first chance that they get. It's insane. Like they didn't even have the ball at all until that point, and they score 1-0. So Ottawa are up. Now, after the goal, Tides drop a little bit of their press for a bit. I mean, understandably so. Meanwhile, Rapid are happy to build up from the back. And Rapid realize that they can catch the Tides on the break quite a bit, so they don't really have to push it too much, because evidently the midfield of Halifax was not at all comparable to the midfield of Ottawa. I mean, especially Jonstotir was struggling massively to keep track of Minna Lee, who seemed like she was always open. Right, so that's how the half kept going until towards the end of the first half. Tides decided to start playing direct, which I think they should do a lot more often, because they do have talent up top. Tiffany Cameron's pretty good, but they just never seem to find her. So it seems like something clicked and they started playing direct, and that really started creating some chances. Kennedy, Cameron, and Miller all started getting involved more. They were able to catch Rapid on the break more, but once again, the struggle was with that last finish, or the last pass or the finish in the final third. And a great example of this was, there was one time Kennedy who gets the ball on the right-hand flank and puts it in, and it's just rolled into the box open for Nakamura to just come in and place it into the net from the penalty spot almost, and she puts it over the bar. And that just sums up not just the half, not just the game, but just the whole season for Halifax in terms of their finishing quality and just that expertise on that finishing touch. Anyways, in the second half, as the game starts, once again, Rapid are happy to sit back a little bit. So they actually changed to a back three, but not by pulling back Desi Scott and bringing the fullbacks up, but they just send left back up and the right back stays back. So it's not as attacking as they usually play. So this actually gives more time on the ball for Halifax, especially on that right flank where the fullback is not high up. So Tides do get some time and they try to play from the back. But turns out playing from the back is also not something Halifax should be doing, because Rikers, who has the ball for Halifax in defense, tries to play around and then eventually decides to play a back pass to her goalkeeper and makes an atrocious back pass to Annika Toth. She gives the ball to Pridham, who should have scored if not for that tackle that Annika Toth makes on her. But that tackle gives the ball just on a freebie to Minna Lee, and she just slots it home into an open net. And that's 2-0 for the Rapid right at the beginning of the second half. And that's just asking for trouble, Halifax Tides. They just were their worst enemy in that situation. And I think both goals kind of weren't completely attributable to Ottawa. Both goals had some amount of luck to it for Ottawa, but in this case, Tides really had themselves to blame. And with the 2 goals, Rapid started dropping to a 4 at the back now and let the Tides really build up if they can, which they don't. So Rapid is not complaining. And they just keep going and going until they get a free kick on the left flank, put the ball in, and once again, Tides just cannot defend. They give Rapid multiple tries because of poor clearances. I mean, one of the clearances with Kennedy just completely doing a back pass once again inside her own box gives Ottawa another chance. And then the first chance they don't score, and eventually it falls to Liv Scott right on the mouth of the goal, and Liv Scott just heads it home, and Rapid are 3-0. Tides really once again make their own life difficult with poor defensive work, and I'd say like the first 3 goals all kind of show how bad they were in defense this game. Rapid continue to have the majority of the ball even after that, even though they're at this point really sitting back, really not consciously going in for an attack. And they know, because Halifax midfield does not have as much cohesion, they can always switch it on and create more chances if they wanted to. And that's what they do. Like eventually they were like, okay, let's play up a little bit. They build up, and that build up leads to Julia Benatti getting the ball with a lot of time and space. Once again, Karima Lemire or Nakamura really not able to track the midfield well enough. And she makes a run and takes a great shot, and it comes off the bar and lands for Fridland, who's there to finish it, and they go 4 up. And it just kept coming. I mean, from there, it just was, when it rains, it pours, and it was really a downpour. I mean, Tides from there tried to press up very high. They were like, okay, we're already 4-0 down. Let's just go and try to win something here. And they try to press very high, but really without any plan. Because as soon as Rapid are able to play through that press, they get such a high amount of space in the midfield. And from there, they just build up through Benatti once again, who is just free to roam around because Halifax has committed a lot of numbers up the pitch. And she makes a run, opens up a lot of space for herself. And Stella Downing, who had just come into the game at that point, makes a really nice run for Benatti. And Benatti sees that, plays this really nice through ball. And Downing just produces a great finish from there to make it 5-0. Great credit to Stella Downing. She'd just come in maybe 2 minutes before that. But yeah, at that point, really the game had been over for a long time. So overall, I think the scoreline does still flatter Ottawa's actual performance. I'd say 3 of the 5 goals were pretty terrible work from the defense of Halifax Tides instead of Rapid actually creating them. That said, you have to give them credit. You have to give Ottawa credit for finishing the chances as they should and keeping that momentum going. Whereas Halifax, they really need to take a lesson from Ottawa about how finishing works. But I would say, Tides will be more concerned about their defense regressing than their attack improving at this point, really. That was their strong suit till this point, and in this game, they just lost that as well. Anyways, Rapid, meanwhile, definitely can take this momentum and need to build for next week because they did move into the third spot with the other results of this week. And so let's get into the other games and talk about that as well because the table is getting really interesting. All right, so the second game this weekend was AFC Toronto hosting Calgary Wild. Now, this game didn't have any of those middle-of-the-table drama, but it did have two teams coming off of a loss and trying to prove a point because AFC Toronto, even though they had a week off last weekend, they did come from a loss to Vancouver the weekend before. Remember, they were a player up and still lost to Vancouver, so they had something to prove. Meanwhile, Calgary were coming in from their own loss to Montreal last week, 0-2, I think. So Calgary especially needed some consistency in forward line. Meanwhile, Toronto was trying to prove a point that they were the team to beat. So with changes, the main change I would say for Toronto was Hunter actually sat out and Rowe came in, which was interesting. Meanwhile, for Calgary, I would say the major change was Michelle Romero started in place of Ali Green. I think Ali Green was injured. And right away, I think Toronto made note of that as well because they started exploiting that left back position where Ali Green usually plays. And now Romero is playing right from minute one. Minute one, Romero gets beat and Okoronkwo makes a great run behind her, but just can't find anyone at the end of the cross that she makes. And that was right away telling everyone that, hey, we know where your weakness is this game. And Calgary, I would say, started off poorly just defensively in general. They made some poor clearances. They were missing their passes in their own half. They were just not switched on in the maybe like 5 minutes or so. And this gives Toronto a lot of the ball in the first 5 to 10 minutes. Partly Calgary being rusty, but also Calgary just playing a very defensive formation out of possession. They were playing a 4-5-1, which is usually not what they played. So they were just dropping back. Their forward line was just dropping back. They just didn't have a lot of press and they just sat back. So Calgary would try to play direct whenever they did have the ball. And because of that same formation, because they only had one forward player pushing high up, they would almost always lose the ball to Toronto. So that just meant that in general, Toronto had the majority of the ball. But as the game settled, Calgary did come out of that shell a little bit and they started playing their usual 4-1-2-3 formation. That's what they usually play with the three forward line players. They did start doing that, and that helped push Toronto back a little bit as well. It gave them more possession, but the problem once again was they couldn't find any effective passes in that final third. Now, throughout the first half, I would say both teams kind of had spells of possession, especially Toronto had spells of high press, which would lead Calgary to lose the ball and their shape, and that would mean that they would go defensive again. But the problem was Toronto was not able to really create anything with it until when one of the attempts that Toronto made at pressing finally leads to some good combination play with Rowe and Okoronkwo. They combine together and they find a lot of space for Zoe Burns on the right-hand flank. Guess why? Because Michelle Romero was completely out of position and she'd been struggling for her positioning all game. And so Burns get a lot of time to look up, take a shot. And even though I would say it was not a great one, to be honest, it takes a deflection, unfortunately, for Calgary and ends up in the net. And Toronto go 1-0 up. So finally, Toronto showed what they can do, though I do think they took a lot of time to show that. And also, eventually, I think it also had something to do with Calgary being not great in their defense, especially Romero. In the second half, Toronto now once again come out with a good high press. They have these phases of good high press, and so this leads to a free kick, and it gets cleared, and it lands with Burns. It seems like it was her day. She just takes a really composed shot and finds the left corner, and it's 2-0 right at the start of the first half. I mean, that's a great start by Toronto to just put their foot forward and show they're the boss, and they do that, before Calgary could even do anything. And then for the next 10-15 minutes, Toronto just played very high press and absolutely bossed possession. I think they should be doing this more often. In a lot of previous games, Toronto has this tendency to sit back with their 3 at the defense and 5 midfield. The outside wingers would just go back into a 5 defense position. But this game, they just kept pressing high continuously, even when they were 2-0 up. That gave Calgary very less space to do anything with. While they used this possession to exploit some struggles of Romero, especially on that right wing, I would say in general, though, I don't think Toronto were efficient with that possession that they got from that high press. And then in the second half, with some more subs coming in, I would say Toronto's pressing shape suffered a little bit, and that gave Calgary a little bit more time on the ball. But once again, that possession didn't do much except for showing Calgary's weakness in the final third. They were able to bring the ball multiple times through Robertson and Maggie Doherty-Howard, but there's barely any good runs made by Harvey or Gray or Steer. Or actually, Steer comes in later in the game, but like any of the forward line players, Bacham was substituted early on in the second half as well, but any of them are not able to really connect well with Maggie Doherty-Howard or Robertson or even Maddie Wilson and do anything with it. I mean, Maggie Doherty-Howard tries her best to play through multiple through balls, but without really connecting with any of the forwards. And that really sums up Calgary's, I would say, last couple of months almost. Poor quality in the forward line. It has been their biggest issue, and it becomes harder when a team like Toronto can press hard and put pressure on the defense. Meanwhile, Toronto deserves a lot of credit for their relentless pressing this game. I have to say that because I've been pretty critical of them when they have tried to sit back and defend their leads sometimes. They might have learned that lesson from Vancouver. But anyways, they deserve a lot of credit. They could have done a lot more with the ball, though, when they did get the ball back with that pressing. But I guess maybe they missed Hunter in the forward line. I would say that. But overall, I'll be honest, Toronto does look like the team to beat. And you know what? I think I know which team can actually get close to that. And that team played in our next game. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Vancouver and Montreal Roses. All right, let's talk about the game of the week. It had to be. Even in my predictions last week, I mentioned it. This had to be the game of the week. This had to be the game with the two closest caliber teams. Vancouver Rise hosting Montreal Roses. There was so much context. I mean, we covered this earlier in the news section. The biggest context was Latifa Abdu moving on from Montreal Roses and coming to the Rise, even though she wasn't allowed to play in this game. But there was so much more context. I mean, Vancouver were coming in with a 3-2 win against Calgary. They had been unbeaten in 6 games, but they had never beaten Montreal, right? And Montreal, in turn, were coming in with a pretty good win against Calgary, proving a point that they just didn't need Latifa Abdu. They could still win. And Roses actually had a pretty good run against Vancouver. They have 2 wins and a tie against the Rise before this. So much at stake. The second place was at stake. Whoever wins could get the second spot. And if Montreal loses, especially after Ottawa's result or earlier in the week, it meant if Montreal loses, they're going to drop all the way from second to fourth. So much was on stake. Well, in terms of changes, Roses were like, we don't care about the stakes. We're going to keep the same team. Made sense, actually, because last game was a statement win. After all that happened with Latifa Abdu the week before, Montreal Roses had a very good statement win against Calgary, so I wouldn't blame them for that. That was actually a pretty good game for them, and so they just kept that formation. Meanwhile, Vancouver, they had a big boost with Quinn returning after their concussion, and that means Chang joins up top alongside DeFilippo and Holly Ward, right? And then Jalen Wright also starts in right back, right? So those are the changes that were made. And right away, Montreal, they have a habit of doing this. They start strong and they start by exploiting the Vancouver weakness, which I think is their current weakness, which is Okamoto in the left back position. Because Okamoto, they keep sending her up and they keep playing the right back in the back 3 for Vancouver, which means Okamoto has a lot of responsibility to make sure that she tracks back, which she doesn't really do a lot. And Cherem, who I think for Montreal has been pretty good, stretches that flank really well and is able to put in a really good shift behind Okamoto. And right away in the first, I think 4 minutes or so, Cherem tries to beat past Okamoto, has a couple of good runs. One of them actually, she gets the ball and she makes a really good cross, but no one's at the end of it, right? So they do a very good job, Montreal, not just in terms of stretching that flank, but also just in terms of pressing high and keeping the ball and trying to build from that right flank. This also leads to Vancouver to be a little disorganized, I would say. In general, Vancouver were not super well-oiled in terms of their passes, in terms of their build-up, except for one time where actually it was Montreal who gifts the Rice with a really good chance because they play a terrible back pass, but Pacioretty skies it over the bar. And so that should have been 1-0 actually Vancouver at that point. But anyways, overall, the first 10 to 15 minutes, Montreal Roses were on top. And rightfully so, the goal comes from Montreal. They reap the reward for great pressing. I mean, Vancouver tries to play from the back, and Jessica Coward chooses a really bad pass. I think this was the third back pass we've seen this weekend, which has been just woeful. And this time, Tanya Boychuk wins it from her, and she's through on goal and a great finish past McCaslin to put Montreal 1-0 up. So very well-deserved Montreal for that goal initially. But after that goal, they dropped that press. I don't know why. I mean, it is hard to keep up pressing for longer, but still. But this lets Rise into the game and is able to start connecting passes through the midfield, and that's where Quinn comes in. They really missed Quinn last game. We all know they're such a big presence for Vancouver, and it's so hard once Quinn and Stanton start combining, and one such combination finds Quinn threading a delicious ball from midfield to Holly Ward, who then takes in stride and takes an early shot from outside the box and makes it 1-1. I mean, once Vancouver starts connecting passes in that midfield because Montreal stops pressing high enough, it was a different game. Vancouver just starts showing their quality, and it was a beautifully created goal by Quinn and Holly Ward. But that said, Roses also aided it by, as I mentioned, falling off the press. Now, Montreal's tried to match Vancouver a little bit after this with their back three style a little bit. As I mentioned, Vancouver played this back three where they send up their left back and keep their right back in that back three. Montreal started doing that with sending Laura Schenk up and, playing a back three. I really don't know why they were doing this, because more often than not, because it was Laura Schenk going up on the left back for Roses, Pacioretty, who is such a smart player, she identified that and kept running into that space left behind by Schenk on that flank. And it just kept creating chances. I mean, almost for the 15 to 20 minutes in the first half, the latter 15 to 20 minutes of the first half, it was the same pattern again and again. Montreal would get the ball, do a little bit with it, and then lose it. And then as soon as Vancouver get the ball, they just put it up to Pacioretty, and she beats Schenk and tries to create a chance. And it just kept happening, and it finally works. Another great diagonal ball that Quinn plays to Pacioretty. As soon as Quinn gets the ball, she's like, okay, where's Pacioretty? She's on that right flank. She's behind Schenk. Let's exploit that. Pacioretty gets the ball. Even though she does have a little bit more work to do this time, she brings it into the ball. She brings it into the box. She cuts in, beats Schenk, and curls it into the top corner. Really beautiful goal, I have to say. I mean, both Vancouver goals were beautiful. The first one for just the midfield cohesion that Vancouver showed with Quinn and Stanton and Holly Ward. And the second one, once again, Quinn showing their absolute class with long balls, and Pacioretty then showing her class with being able to beat Schenk and then just curling it. So two really beautiful goals. Vancouver are 2-1 up. And just like that in the first half, it swings rapidly from Montreal starting out strong to Vancouver coming back and saying, nope, not in our home. And the second half really is where Vancouver shines, because they start off of the better of the two teams. They start pressing better this time. They get more time on the ball and possession in the attacking third. And actually a couple of times they even catch out Montreal. Like one time, they catch out Capadona in her own box with another terrible back pass. It was a week of back passes, I would say. This time Holly Ward, but they can't finish. So very close to being 3-1. Montreal really don't get a lot of time on the ball the second half due to that pressing. And even when they do, they're pretty mediocre. I mean, I have to say, the only good option that Montreal has in attack now, like in the whole game, was Cherem. They're not able to connect at all with Paquin. Boychuk is also struggling, and partly just because she's all over the place. She's going deep into the midfield to try to get the ball and create something. She's not able to do that. And in general, they're just not able to find a outlet, I mean, as the game closes, Vancouver even stops pressing. and gives Montreal a ton of time and space. But then, that's the thing. They're able to use the flanks, but there's very little threat through the middle. Boychuk is nowhere to be seen in the box. She's usually almost always the one trying to create it. Moniard and Paquin are not probably the answer, to be honest, and they lack any good incisive runs or passes to threaten Vancouver's defense. Partly it's just Vancouver being good defensively. I also have to admit that. I mean, last game, Montreal showed that they can hold up, but it was also against a Calgary Wild team. So into the playoffs, I am quite concerned. Montreal is going to struggle a little bit if they go this way. They really need to figure out a better strategy for connecting the midfield and offense. And I'm starting to worry for Montreal. Meanwhile, Vancouver showed why they're unbeaten in 7 games. I mean, this was a statement win. Quinn produced a masterclass. 2 goals they assisted. I mean, wow, just wow. So Quinn made the difference with some really incisive combinations. And Peczerski, I have to give her a lot of credit. She has been a workhorse, not just this game, but quite a few weeks now. Holly Ward has shown up as well. So Rise really are a threat. And now with Latifa Abdu joining the squad, man, this is the team that can take down AFC Toronto. I think Vancouver are probably going to end up second in the table to end the season. The battle for the second place, I think Vancouver is the winner unless something drastically changes. I mean, their offense is really getting better now with Peczerski, Holly Ward, and Abdu. This is a team that can be very hard to beat, and they are definitely going to challenge AFC Toronto. I can't wait. I can't wait for how this is going to turn out, but let's jump into the next week and look at some predictions. All right, so let's do some predictions for this weekend. We have our first game on Saturday where Halifax is hosting Toronto. And man, this can get ugly if the Tides are not able to find a strategy, especially against the league leaders. I mean, I worry for them a little bit. I mean, Toronto should be really sweeping the floor with Tides on this. They need to work on their finishing, though. I would say this is a good chance for them to polish up their finishing and find that connection between midfield and their forward lines. They have been struggling a little bit with that recently, but I mean, this should be a win for Toronto. I would say 2-0 most likely. But yeah, the first game is that. The second one, now we start getting into more implications for the table because Vancouver is playing. They're hosting Calgary though, and Vancouver really will be trying to just build on that dominant run. They're in now 7 unbeaten games. They're going to just try to continue that, and most likely will also mean the first start for Latifa Abdu, right? So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. Meanwhile, for Calgary, it's going to be their second straight road game, and they'll need to find a solution for their forward line, which has been woeful, just woeful. So, I don't know. I really don't see them scoring much with the Vancouver defense as well. So yeah, Vancouver most likely is going to win this 2-0, I would say. Third game, and this is the game of the week, has to be. It is the game with the most even matchup. Ottawa hosting Montreal. It's a big game. I mean, it has so many implications. The table, again, as I mentioned, that middle table tussle for the second spot is really close. Now, right now, Ottawa is in the 3rd spot. Montreal has fallen to 4th. But if the results go in a certain way, it can all change. So it should be interesting to see if Roses can bounce back, especially since they're on the road again. Meanwhile, Ottawa has to take that momentum from that 5-0 win and really go for the kill right now. They have to, and especially if they want to keep that 3rd spot and be in touching distance with Vancouver. But yeah, so that last game, once again, this is the game of the week. I'm so excited to watch that and to talk about it once we're all done. So I hope all of you guys have an amazing week and weekend ahead. Enjoy all the games, and I'm sure I'll see you very soon, very early next week for sure. So until then, be good, be kind, and be you.